Hi, hello, welcome. My name is Bethany. My pronouns are she, her. Welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, this is my little tiny corner of the internet where I talk about my knits and any other bits that I feel like. Today is more of a bits video because I want to talk about scrappy projects, and there must be something in the air because literally as I was making notes to record this episode, Andrea Gone and Gabby of Handmade by Gib have announced a summer scrap along. If I got the name wrong, I'll correct myself. I'll also pop up a picture from one of their Instagrams. Just if you're interested in joining that scrap along, I think it's fantastic. I don't know that I'm going to join per se, but I am looking forward to seeing all of the inspo that comes out of this scrap along, make along type thing. Anyway, I would like to talk about scrappy projects because I recently finished one, which I will talk about in a second. But yeah, it just got me thinking about how much I do love scrappy projects. I know they're not for everyone, and that's fine, but I also feel like there's a way to finesse scrappy projects to make them, like, if you don't like that scrappy look, I feel like there's still a way to finesse a pattern and use up leftovers and scraps, especially if that's a goal that you maybe have, because it's part of the process. As soon as you have a crafty hobby, there are going to be leftovers. I think there are very few crafting endeavors that don't create leftovers or scraps, right? Okay, so some disclaimers. This video is not going to be exhaustive. I'm not going to go over every single way that you can use up scraps. Mostly, I'm just going to talk about my own perspective and what I really like to make with scraps, or what has sort of revolutionized my use of scraps. Because I'll tell you, when I first started back into knitting and really getting serious about buying really good quality yarn, and even before that, even when I was buying from big box stores on a student budget, I still had leftovers, and it's like, well, what do I do with those? So I'm going to talk sort of from that perspective. That's also why I mentioned the scrap along, because there could be other ideas, patterns, etc., that I don't mention here, and I won't duplicate the work of those lovely people. So again, just coming from my own perspective, and I hope that you find something that you like. All right, basically, let's start by talking about the, and I'm laughing because it genuinely took me so long in my knitting career. I've been knitting for 14, 15 years, maybe longer than that. 16 years? 16 years. I just did the math mentally. And it really only feels like in perhaps the last 4 to 5 years that it dawned on me that you can hold yarns together and it can look pretty cool. Again, you have to like the look of that particular fabric, as you can see on my body. Now, this is a very clearly marled situation, but I think there are ways to marl yarns together that are a little more subtle. For instance, if you were to use tone on tone, that wasn't exactly what I was going for with this vest, but if you were to really tone on tone it, you're still using up basically double the amount of yarn with a less chaotic, scrappy looking situation. So let's actually talk about what I'm wearing. This is a See My Vest worsted, and I forget the designer name, but I'll pop up all of the information on the screen. And this is my second vest, and this is definitely the scrappiest. So my first one, and this is a good example of tone on tone marling. My first one that I made, which I will pop a picture up of, was made with a beautiful sort of brownie mauve fingering weight held with a brown cognac colored lace weight to achieve the gauge-ish. My gauge was still off, story of my life, for the See My Vest worsted. I had also previously with the exact same yarn combination. I had knit the Gondor vest and I loved that combination and the fact that it really relatively used so little yarn to achieve really a wonderful garment. So when I figured out that the gauge for the Gondor and the gauge for the See My Vest worsted were similar enough that by changing needle size slightly, I could achieve still a really nice fabric holding those two yarns together. I went ahead and did it. And that was very successful. That was my first See My Vest worsted. And because I like wearing that one so much, I was like, well, wouldn't it be fun to do something really scrappy, but still stick within a color palette? When I filmed my attempt at organizing some of my yarn, I had started to organize some of my fingering weight leftovers into separate plastic Ziploc bags. And basically, I only got part of that done, but one of the bags that I did put together was all blues and teals, essentially. Greens, I kind of like true greens, I left off to the side and put those together. So the bag that I worked from to knit this vest was all like blues and teals, essentially. I'm not going to stand up because of the filming setup once again, but I will pop a picture up of what the entire vest looks like. So really all I did for this one, very similar to my first See My Vest worsted, I was holding fingering weight together, not lace weight this time, but crochet thread. And I have done this previously with a sweater that I wear all the time, which is a sweatshirty version of the Tress Cow. I really hope I'm saying that correctly. Pullover by Along Avec Anna. And intentionally, I was like, I know my gauge is off for this particular pattern, but I loved the way holding fingering weight together with the crochet thread looked. It's a very obviously marled situation, but because I was also switching colors throughout that sweater, it still looks stripy, but in a sort of softer way. That's the exact same vibe I wanted for this sweater vest. I've also knit it so that it can be worn just as a tank top. Don't know how much wear I'm actually going to get out of it as a tank top. Honestly, we'll just see how I make out through the summer. So knitting this was when I was really thinking about how much I love scrappy projects and how potato chippy it is to me. I think it's partially the fact that you're usually sort of rapidly changing colors, or it's also that you can just see the fact that you're using up all this leftover yarn, and it's very satisfying. And also hopefully you are knitting it up into something that you will love, or perhaps that someone else will love. Okay, with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about other projects that I have knit where I'm holding yarns together, and I've slightly categorized just so it's a little less random. The first thing I'm going to talk about is accessories or hats. Let's do hats first. If you've been here for a minute, you know that the Standing Rock hat by Lavanya Petrosella is my go-to 2x2 rib hat. This one I have knit just holding a single strand of DK, but I have also knit it for the worsted version because there's sort of two sizes in this pattern. I have knit it holding two strands of fingering together, and that is very satisfying. I have used up mini skeins doing that and just scraps. Usually I try to pair like warm and cool tones together, or sometimes I just go for a fully cool palette or warm palette, depending on the leftovers that I have available to me. So that is very satisfying, and those are also very quick to knit up, and they have made excellent gift knits because they work up so fast, and because generally speaking, Standing Rock, the sizing fits a lot of people. I think you might have an issue if you have a really big head or lots of hair that you have to fit under a hat. But otherwise, it's very, very flexible. And if you're mathy enough, you could probably math the math to get the circumference that you need um, and still maintain the stitch pattern. I won't give it away here, even though it is a free pattern, but I think it's perhaps multiples of 4 or perhaps 6, where if you needed it bigger or smaller to fit someone's head, you could absolutely adjust that way. The other hat that I've knit in a scrappy fashion is the Zoom hat. I believe this is by Lamb & Kid or by a designer who designed this for Lamb & Kid. And my first one that I knit, which I don't have photos of, that one was knit and out of my possession really quite quickly, was knit just straight up in worsted weight, but I have since knit one, again, holding 2 strands of fingering together, and I just adjusted the needle size to be working at a more worsted weight gauge than a DK weight gauge. The other accessory that I have knit multiple times using either full skeins of yarn, which is also just a good stash buster, but still kind of looks a little bit scrappy, or it can look less scrappy if you decide to put together a really specific cohesive palette. And I have also knit this using up mini skeins, and that was very satisfying. This is the Spell Shawl, and I have knit many of these, perhaps 6 or 7 of varying sizes. It's a really good adjustable pattern because you're it is a asymmetrical triangle shawl, and basically if you knit the increase only version of it, which is usually my go-to, you can just go until you're running out of yarn, and then you can use your last, I don't know, say maybe 10% of your yarn that you want to be using to do the edging, which if you're doing the picot does take up a fair amount of yarn. But if you're just doing the I-cord edge, still takes up some yarn, but you can maybe, squeeze it out just a little bit more and really use up every inch of the yarn that you'd like to use. So hopefully while I've been talking about that, I have been scrolling the versions that I have done. Like I said, I have done it with a very curated color palette. I've also done it really, really scrappy, just using leftovers and mini skeins. So that one is like very dealer's choice. I think this one is great to just use up whatever you want to use up on it. And also, hopefully, you'll have seen that some of them turn out much bigger. So, like for instance, one where I've used nearly the entirety of 3 skeins of fingering weight turns out to be really quite a large scarf or wrap, but at a DK weight gauge, so it's very cozy. And I've also done smaller ones, which are more shawlette scarf size, but still at that gauge, so it's still nice and cozy. Okay, let's move on to garments. I've already talked about this, so I won't go back and repeat myself about See My Vest Worsted, but that's a great pattern, I think. And also a big disclaimer at the top of this one, and perhaps I should have done it at the top of the video. When you hold yarns together, or even if you don't, you have free will. If you want to try to insert the fabric that you like to knit, either holding yarns together or singly, you can turn almost any pattern into a scrappy or use up leftovers pattern, right? As long as you're matching gauge-ish. And I say that as like, because we're going into the garment section, you might want to be a little more critical of your gauge. But also if you're willing to do the gauge math and just figure out what size of garment you would like to knit holding yarns together, that's great. If it means you have to go up or down from your regular size, do it. If you like the fabric that you're getting with the yarns that you're using, just do it. Just do it. Remember that you have free will and you are the boss of your knitting. Like I said, I already mentioned the See My Vest Worsted, and we've already talked about the Trescow sweater, which was also in my list of things that I have made as a scrappy version. Um, let's also talk about the Mender's cardigan by Brienne Moody. This was actually probably my first foray into the revolution of holding yarns together and getting a really successful, I think, quite cohesive looking project all together. When I first knit this cardigan, yeah, this was the first one that I did. I've done multiple versions since then, either holding yarns together or not, and just knitting at DK weight gauge. Um, I had tons of turquoise yarn in my stash. I still have some, but because it's one of my favorite colors, I had tons of it, and I had single skeins all over the place, and I didn't know what to do with them because they were single skeins, and I'm like, well, I'm not just going to make socks out of these. They're too beautiful to do that. So I decided to hold them together into one garment. I will say, like I've said and mentioned before, my gauge was very off for this project. I thought I was going to end up with a much closer fitting cardigan than I actually did. However, it was a big win that it actually turned out larger than I wanted, because it has been a wonderful throw on top kind of garment, and but without being too heavy. It doesn't quite feel like you're wearing worsted weight, even though the gauge is probably close to worsted weight, because of the needle size and holding two strands of fingering together throughout. But yeah, this was a really, really successful project for me. I kind of just winged it in terms of length as well, because the original pattern is quite cropped, but I wanted to use up every single inch of these skeins that I had. And then I also had a skein of just plain semi-solid turquoise yarn, which I used for the button band, which had no buttons. I intentionally wanted just an open cardigan, and the cuffs on the sleeves. Sleeves were not knit to full length, which was the point. I did want them to be 3/4 / at least below the elbow, just because that works for me, as we've discussed before. That was super, super successful for me, and I wear it so often. It's probably a combination of the slightly oversized fit, is wonderful, and it's in my favorite color, which it gives me joy to wear it. And like I said, remember that you can turn any favorite pattern into a scrappy pattern, right? So if you have a favorite sweater pattern or tee pattern, if you're okay with just it being striped or it being a little bit scrappy looking, anything can use up leftovers and scraps. Let's now move on to the section that I'm calling home things, mostly because it's home decor or other more practical items that you don't wear on your person. So for me, this is blankets and other such items. So what I have personally knit in this category is really only two things. Still working on the blanket of doom, and that's going, but it's also using up a lot of leftovers, which I'm finding to be very satisfying. It's less motivating now that the warm weather is here. It was totally fine when it was still cold and I actually wanted to be under that monster, but now now that it's warm, I have almost zero motivation to work on it. So it may hibernate for the summer, and then once September rolls around, I might get back to it. Anyway, blankets are great. I think you can find lots of different kinds of blankets, where you can either hold yarns together to achieve a DK or a worsted weight gauge, or this is the opportunity to use up all those leftovers and make something like a mitered square blanket, where you take your leftovers and you knit up a mitered square, and then in the end you have tons of squares to sew together. Not sure if that's your jam, not mine particularly, but it is also very effective because that can be absolutely chaotic and you can use up every single scrap that you have, or you can again create a really curated palette, and still have it look scrappy, but within the confines of a color palette like blue or green or all pinks and reds or whatever your jam is. The other thing that I've made that I actually use all the time, and I keep thinking that I need to make another one so that there can be a rotation, is a hot water bottle cover. There are a number of patterns that you can use for this, but I'll pop up the one that I knit myself, which is a ribbed one, and I believe it was free. If I'm wrong, I'll correct myself. But this was great. This was holding two strands of, I think, light fingering weight together, so we were much closer to perhaps a sport gauge on this. I also did knit it pretty densely because I didn't want I didn't want the fabric to look see-through or gapey when it's stretched over the hot water bottle. I live in Canada, so it gets cold, and even though my apartment is not particularly cold, I can get chilled pretty quickly. So if that happens, I will often be on the couch with a hot water bottle or go to bed with one. So this is super, super handy. I used to just have like a makeshift towel drawstring covering my hot water bottle, but since knitting the wool one, that lives on that thing. So that's why I'm saying, I'm like, because it's living on there, I'm like, oh, that should probably get a bit of a wash at some point, or at least there should be a rotation, so that, you know, if something happens, if there's a spill, whatever, it can, you know, get hand washed and then be okay. But this one is great. I've also knit a runner for the top of one of my bookcases, just to put plants on so that like I don't get, you know, rings or anything like that, if I happen to spill or there's some sort of disaster with the soil from my plants, from my house plants. And that was using up single skeins, but this is absolutely an opportunity to have it be scrappy, right? Hold it together with like a single color and then have it be scrappy if that's your vibe. Or again, have this be like the color palette thing where you just go from, say, from light to dark or dark to light through a particular palette. Okay, before we go any farther, honorable mention, because I'm sort of backtracking into accessories, but this is one being with the yarn being held single. Again, this is absolutely a moment where if you have a favorite accessory pattern that doesn't hold yarns together, you can still scrapify pretty much any scarf, hat, shawl, whatever you would like to do, because stripes are great. Again, also with a palette, you can sort of create a fade. I don't feel as though I'm particularly adept at that, but if that is a skill you have, imagine all the cool fade things that you could make with your leftovers. That would be really, really cool. So I'm going to give an honorable mention to the Mooncat shawl, which I have recently finished a version of. Again, caveat, I did mine using 2 full skeins that were just sitting around, you know, being lonely. And then um, for the contrast color, or the color that used less yardage, I did use leftovers for that, but the rest of it was knit in just full skeins that I had lying around. But again, I feel as though you could take this one and really find a way to scrapify it. Actually, this one, like I was talking about with a fade, if you can curate a really good fade from top to bottom, the Mooncat shawl would look beautiful in that. This one is also super obvious, but let's talk about it now. Socks are great scrappy moments because, I'm laughing, they don't even have to look that attractive. They're on your feet and they're probably in shoes or slippers. So even if it doesn't really turn out the way you want and it looks, what did one YouTuber call it? Like kind of clown barfy. It's kind of fine. It still uses it up. It turns into a really useful item, and you use up leftovers. And of course, you don't have to get a special pattern for this. If you have a favorite sock recipe or pattern, like Summerlee's I'm So Basic, or something else that it's very easy to just fade in the colors or stripe them in, because that can be really, really effective. go ahead and do that. I have done a number of specifically shorty socks using up leftovers. And for me, and this is following Summer Lee's shorty weekend shorty sock. Oh gosh, you'd think I'd get it right after knitting it so often, but I'll pop it up. And this one, in the instructions, she actually has you using up small amounts of yarn basically for each part of the sock. So the cuff is in one color, the leg and foot are in another, the heel and the heel flap are even in two different colors. So you can really use up tiny amounts if you want to. And then the toe is a different color as well. And if you're into the idea of non-matching pairs of socks, this is fantastic for you, right? So you don't even have to have enough leftovers or scraps to have a pair of socks absolutely match. To me, I would probably make sure that maybe my main color that I'm using for the leg and foot, that there's enough for the pair, and then everything else about it could be opposite or non-matching. So that is a great one to check out because for one thing, it leads you through changing colors very effectively. And also because it's a shorty sock, you have the advantage of not knitting forever and ever, but still using up scraps and leftovers. I'm also going to talk about D20 socks. Shout out to M to the third, who I don't want to say is the actual originator for this because who knows who the actual originator would be. But I got inspired by seeing her knit D20 socks. I believe it was a couple of years ago now. But basically, she picked out 20 colors. I think it was a combination of full skeins and leftovers, and she numbered them. And then she would roll a 20-sided die that you use in Dungeons and Dragons, and that would choose her color for her. And then she'd roll it a second time to determine how many rounds or rows that she would be knitting in that color, which is a very cool and chaotic way to do it. When I knit two pairs of these, I knit one for myself and one for my husband, and I made him roll for his own socks. So every time it was time to change color, he had to roll. But what I did is I actually kept it to a specific number of rounds, just because it felt more satisfying to me for the stripes to be all the same width. So I sort of circumvented it, but I totally let the rolling for the color that was going to be used next be whatever it was going to be. My only exception was if it was rolled and it was the exact same color I had just started using, because I didn't want that, right? I didn't want like 3/4 of the sock to be all in one color. I did want there to be a variety that way. So that is a fantastic way to use up scraps and sort of gamify using it, because if you're also a person who maybe stresses out about like what colors to put together, again, like disclaimer, you could choose 20 colors or versions of a color. Again, you could define it into a palette and it could be all blues the way that my vest is. But because there can be such variety within like a single color, it will still look scrappy and random, just a little more defined. Mine were absolutely chaotic. I was very determined to use up leftovers, and when I used up a full color, like if I had very little of a particular color, if I used it up, I just substituted another leftover or scrap in, and that became, the new number 15 or whatever it happened to be. I am now going to move on to another category, only because I feel like these patterns are basically made for using up very little yarn, and they are also they're toys, okay, basically. So shout out to the frog pattern by Claire Garland. If you've been here for a minute, you know that I love this pattern. I have knit a number of frogs for myself and for others that I love, and they're always a big hit. And they are, while they are fiddly, they are so worth it in the end. And you're able to use up very small bits of yarn if you want to, depending on how big you want to make your frog. In terms of sizing, I have followed the directions as written with the recommended needle size, but I have also sized all the way down to basically sock needles or 2.5 needles and made tiny little frogs, which are just the most adorable thing I've ever seen. Also, any of the gnome patterns by Sarah Schira are wonderful, and they're basically made for using small amounts of yarn or mini skein sets. If you've got mini skein sets and you don't know what to do with them, gnomes, man, gnomes, because you can choose the color for the hat, for the like little body of the gnome, and then you can even make the nose and the beard or the hair of the gnome like whatever color you want. It can be absolutely wild. You know, kind of maybe the wilder the cuter, I don't know. I've only knit one gnome so far, but it was very satisfying to use up just tiny bits of yarn in a really, really cute way. And that is it. That's my very limited roundup of scrappy patterns. Obviously, there's so much more out there that you can make make with scraps and leftovers. So I would love to hear, what have you made with scraps and leftovers? Is it something I would never think of making? Maybe. Or is it a favorite pattern? I'd love to know that too. So yeah, maybe put all of that in the comments so that we can all see what we've made with scraps and leftovers. Like I said, maybe check out the summer scrap along, again hosted by Andrea Gaughan and handmade by Gib. That looks like really lots of fun, and it seems like they're like, I don't want to say there are no rules, but it seems very open. You don't necessarily have to knit a garment, but you could. Yeah, it seems like whips and accessories are welcome. Again, maybe go. I'll link both of their Instagrams below, and then you can get full details on that. And if you're going to participate in that, I'd love to know that too. All that being said, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. If you liked this video, or you've liked any of my videos, or you just like the vibe that you see here, please like and subscribe. It does help the channel grow, which it is growing, just slowly. And that's great for me. I don't think I'd ever want to go super viral. But if you do like what you see here, please like and subscribe. And until I see you next time, I hope that wherever you are feeling safe and you are feeling cozy. And I'll see you next time.